Let's now turn to this wonderful panel here and to get your reactions to what you've heard and what you might have read if you were able to read anything in advance. By way of introduction, I'm just going to start beside me and go outwards. We'll start with Carol. I've known Carol. Carol Dossi is one of Tanzania's foremost women entrepreneurs. Very brave, courageous woman who has been through all sorts of hurricanes in promoting business and empowerment of young people and women and in the digital space. So we'll be hearing from Carol your own personal views, experiences around this particular topic. Dr. Nandera Mhando, newly appointed Commissioner for Social Welfare at Dr. Zainab Chaula's ministry. She is a sociologist and an anthropologist at the same time and looking into informal sector businesses. So we'd like to hear from you, your own experiences there. Irene Madeje calls herself what do you call yourself? A financial inclusion advocate, right?
Absolutely.
Are you a former banker like me?
I am.
You are. Don't tell them. They're still bankers. But for financial inclusion advocate, we'd really like to hear more about your work and what you're seeing works and doesn't work in terms of financial inclusion and access to assets. Dr. Samuel Ndandala, who doesn't like to be called a doctor because he says he's not yet a doctor. He's a senior manager at Deloitte and one person I've known for quite a while, but I don't want to sound patronizing. But I remember him when he was newly hired at PwC. This is over 20 years ago. And look at him. You are old, I'm sorry. It's showing on your head. But expert in economics, finance, and taxation, and I'm going to challenge you to tell us a little bit about what private sector is or isn't doing in terms of this topic of access to assets and economic opportunities. And last but certainly not least, Hodan Ado. Welcome. UN Women Representative in Tanzania since April 2018. That's quite a while. And we'd like to hear from you about the bigger picture of promoting gender equality nationally and globally, and how things like generation equality can really boost this agenda in Tanzania. So let me start. So welcome, please, the panel. A simple question to all of you. In 30 seconds, what did you hear that struck you the most, that was the most interesting, insightful, surprising, or disappointing? What did you hear that was from the report, so from the macro or from the women's section? We'll start with you.
For me, what really struck me was the fact that in Tanzania, we have higher average of women who are actually, in economic sectors already. They're getting salaried. We're talking about the average in sub-Saharan being 63, in Tanzania 80%. So, I was just trying to think, how is that fitting to some of the statistics and facts that we know on the ground, where we still have women still in terms of income, they're falling behind. The statistics are showing they're earning half of what the men are earning. From financial inclusion, we'll talk about still there, you have more women that are outside the system, especially the banking sector. So, that's just very conflicting sort of information. And to know that it's actually existed for some time and we are ahead. So we need to think critically and see how can we just really, it's a low-hanging fruit. That's where I'm actually looking at it from.
So more women in the labor force, but how come we're not seeing really
We're not seeing money, we're not seeing those improvements and stuff like that,
Dr. Mhando, what surprised you the most?
I think, personally, I find nothing surprising. I think maybe it comes from the different research I've been reading. We know women are out there. A lot of them are in business. We know a lot of them are doing farming. But we know that definitely there are gaps, a lot of gaps, which is causing all these results that we are seeing. And that has to do also with the process, the culture, the society that these women are in.
Right.
And as women struggle to confront, it seems a lot of programs are leaving men behind. So they're not supporting women more and more. And that's why we are seeing an increase in violence and so forth. So for me, what I see, if you look from the informal sector to farming, that is the result. Yes, women are relegated. They're doing the least, less with capital issues, and they're more into perishable and cooking, food vending and stuff like that. They're into farming without enough labor, and they're not able to access land, bigger land for rent. So you really see that's why this is.
So the gaps that were mentioned in the report, those are, very familiar for you.
Yes.
Very familiar. My surprising one was the fact that women just didn't have access to male labor at the farm. That was an interesting statistics. Carol, what surprised you, or what was insightful?
I think it's what I didn't see that acted as a reminder on what more we need to do. So we saw a lot of figures on the gender gaps across a lot of sectors, but one thing that I didn't see was the digital divide, which to me should be at the very core of women's inclusion, whether it's in financial services, whether it's in just the broader economic opportunities or economic aspects. So how many women are accessing digital opportunities? How many women are online? How many women have access to the digital economy? And that just speaks to a limitation that we've been trying to address for a couple of years now, which is the lack of disaggregated data, which I'm now going to put a call to the World Bank and say, is there anything you can do about, closing the digital gender divide, but mainly or particularly on the area of data? Because I believe that with all this data that we have on all these other sectors, if we have the data on the digital divide, the gender digital divide, we might be able to come up with more tailor-made solutions and interventions that would reel more women in terms of really encouraging or promoting access to these economic opportunities and assets, as the theme tells us.
And keeping them safe online.
And keeping them safe online.
Absolutely. I have 2 daughters. I'm worried about that myself.
Yeah, as you should.
Samuel, what surprised you or didn't surprise you, or new insight? You look at figures all day, every day. Did you find anything interesting there to grab you?
Yeah, just 2 things. And well, the first surprise was being invited to this panel. When I was invited, I had to remind my good friend Loy that I am still male. And if it's about financial inclusion and economic empowerment for women, I would be glad to participate. So it's great to see that some men are coming along. But I think the interesting thing about Tanzania's economy over the last 20 years is that it has been quite impressive, quite consistent growth. But it has coincided with, I think, for the first time in our post-colonial history, perhaps in history, that women are coming into the labor force, getting into actual formal employment, but also getting into businesses. So you would say the transition of the Tanzanian economy from a low-income country to a middle-income country is greatly accelerated, has been accelerated by the fact that now we have women. We're not there yet, but we have women contributing more to the labor force. And that is on the back of the fact that, the wings are still clipped. An average woman, I read somewhere that an average woman has 5 hours of unpaid homework for every 1.5 hours of a man's work. So women have pushed our economy considerably over the last 20 years, and I think that's quite interesting. I think the other bit that I would like us to explore a little bit more is the fact that we are addressing institutions and laws, but we really have to do a better job addressing norms. Yeah. Because you would have great laws, you would have great institutions, but if the norms are not there, women face the risk of asset expropriation. They face the risk of contracts not being enforced. If you've tried to buy land in Tanzania, for example, from a woman, even if they don't need spousal consent, they would still want to get spousal consent. So it has to do a lot with the norms of our society. So it's a very interesting dimension to empowerment.
Great point there. We'll come back to it right after we hear. I'm going to twist the question slightly from you, given your big global experience on this issue. What did you find that most inspired you and encouraged you in what you heard about Tanzania's experience with gender and economic access to assets?
Yeah, I think what was very interesting is that in rare occasions do we see government and World Bank and other international speaking the same language in terms of the issues, the analysis on where we are. And I think, what's very good about the Tanzania case, as it was said by the PS, is that there's been a lot of investments that the government has made on the laws and policies, and even, especially policies of the 10% allocation for local government and so forth. So there's quite a bit that has to be, commended, and I think the report comes out in that way, that it does that. But as in many countries, and I would like to follow up on Samuel's point, to analyze or to go deeply into the figures, the data that we're seeing, what's missing is the other elements, the qualitative analysis. What does it mean for women? Because they're not, in an island on their own. They're in a culture. They're in practices that have a huge amount of impact on their lives, whether they have access to education, to agricultural productivity, to political participation, and even to protecting themselves from violence, which is such an important intersector in terms of the barrier for women and girls' access to their human capital potential. So I think that the analysis, it's very good. It is building on global perspective, as it was said by Ya, and it builds on some research that was done, especially on the agricultural productivity, on the gender gap of agricultural productivity, which I think we partnered with the bank many years ago. So the evidence is still there, is in terms of how do we then move forward, and it requires multiple interventions that are intersectoral, that are holistic in their interventions, that define, the appropriate interventions. And with Tanzania and globally, we have only 8 years before the commitments for the Sustainable Development Goals. The United Nations here in Tanzania, we're just now developing a new Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework in partnership with the government, in partnership with private sector, which I think the report didn't mention. A lot of the responsibility was on the women and so forth, but this private sector and partnerships that is so essential for employment, for entrepreneurship, for even, in terms of the opportunities that the private sector is providing for women is important. So we need to look at it from a broader perspective, and I think the analysis in the report, it's very, very good, but we need to go deeper to then understand what does it mean from a qualitative perspective? How do we then move forward? What are the actual barriers that are preventing women and girls for reaching their potential and economic empowerment? And it's those types of interventions that need to be done together with government, civil society, which is an important resource in Tanzania, private sector, United Nations, World Bank and other IFIs and other development partners that are also investing in the country. But it's important to ensure that women are part of this discussion as well. So I think it's a very good report. But it asks you more questions. So why?
So let me ask a question, actually, that was raised by Samuel on norms. It's actually the title of the report, Empowering Women. Now, that word caused some reaction over here. You didn't notice when you were watching the video. But some people here were going, So, Irene, you didn't like that word empowering, It was on the video, the second video that was there. Yeah. Carol, you raised the issue in a tweet. You wrote a paper about it. The semantics, however, are important in norm setting, aren't they? Yeah, what you name something, how you define something is important. Why don't you like it, Irene? What is your problem with the word empowering? And then I'll come to you, Carol.
Not necessarily a problem with the word empowering per se, but it's just the way we've actually traditionally used it and the way it was said. that, I think it was said in Swahili, we should empower women. We should, as if the power is actually with somebody else to actually give it to a woman. And so it's not necessarily the word itself, but it's just the power that is actually seated from outside a woman that needs to be actually bestowed upon a woman. And that is really the positioning that we're taking, that it's our time. We should actually take these women, we should empower them. No, the women are already empowered. In fact, earlier today, I was reading, somebody just wrote, I think on social media, is women are already empowered and they have power. The thing is, people just need to understand that power and actually be able to appreciate it, so that when you see a woman, going back to the first question, we already have quite a number of them who are actively participating in economic activities. If you look at even some of the reports on small, medium enterprises, we have more women who are actually owning these businesses. So what does it mean when somebody says that we need to empower you while a woman is already out there? And some of this information that we just talked about here, not only are they actively in paid economic activities, but they're also doing this unpaid labor, the social burden, the responsibility to raise and nurture, the society. So, it's just more on the positioning of that power, not necessarily with the word empowering.
Okay. Carol? What's the alternative? You had some nice words out there.
Yeah, so my alternative, just to echo what Irina said, we are hoping, us in the Global South, the women who are contributing, or rather involved in different areas of women's inclusion, we would like to insist that most of the solutions have been sort of like a top-down approach. Mm-hmm. And just to add on to what Irina said, at the end of the day, what are the local women? What is the local specific context of these women? Are we acknowledging the power that they already have, right? And so if we are acknowledging, then why not call them women advancement, meaning that you're supporting them to advance from one stage to another? Why not call them women support programs? Because you're supporting them to move from one step to another towards sustainable development. So at the end of the day, to me, women empowerment feels like a continuation of, all the solutions that we keep on imposing on the targeted groups and disregarding the specific context that could possibly give us a really good entry point and say, okay, we have an encouraging number of women entrepreneurs. What can we do to amplify the power that they already have? So that's always my alternative. And again, we need to own the narrative. Women empowerment is not our narrative. It is really not. So do we have to find out what our narrative is as Tanzanian women, as women in the Global South? What could that look like? How could that now speak into the bigger picture of sustainable development and actually supporting women to advance? That would be my take.
Dr. Mhando, what are your thoughts on that one? We're now changing the title of the report. Yeah. It's going to be called Advancing Women. Cancel it, Advancing Women, and then the rest reads well. Yeah. Doctor, what do you think?
In fact, I was just laughing because it has been a very big topic in our office, led by our...
In the ministry?
Yes, by our permanent secretary.
I'm going to come to you after this.
So many times in our management meeting or with staff meetings, she will be always talking about, what is that empowering? Yeah. Are you not powered enough, Nandel? Yeah. Are you not a commissioner? Yes. Don't you have a PhD? So what is wrong? Why are you not coming out with the power you have to show others? So for me, I find it quite interesting that you are really hitting into what the ministry is focusing on right now, is to tell people that women are empowered. Of course, there are things around that are deterring the situation. Yeah. As we are speaking here, just to recognize that power. We see more women into labor. We are talking of an increase of women in the farms, in the office, in the informal sector, and everywhere. So why isn't that recognized as power and be boosted in a positive way? So for us at the ministry, we see a big gap in the coordination of all these people who are empowering women in that sense that you call it. And coordination in what sense? we find that people are dashing out money in the same location, geographical location, with the same activity. So we cannot see the impact. But we are also seeing people paying money, giving out money, and dashing it out, very tiny money, and expect that a woman will be able
to transform.
just to be empowered, as you said. So we really need to be serious when we talk about financing. How are we financing these women? Especially when we target groups and you give 2 million for a group of 10 women, what will they do? So that is why the narrative keeps on focusing on empowering and not supporting. Because if you talk about supporting, what we want to see as a ministry is a coordinated support. We want to see the outcome in real numbers, but in real, what you're talking about, qualitative. Let's hear about women say we now can, we have assets, we now have access to real enough finance and stuff like that. We are having homes, building our houses, we see tangible results. So one thing, as you were saying, I see a problem, not just top down. I think it's a top down, external, inward.
Yes.
What we think as a country and what we want to see as a change is not what those who are supporting us want it to be done. So what we are calling is, as a ministry now, is a focus where we can have a basket fund, where we will support women and we have a basket fund for children, most vulnerable children, because we think these two things are quite linking into each other. As we see more children in the streets, we see more vulnerable children, that means something is wrong in the family. And as you know, in our culture, it's the women who take care of the children. So if there's a problem with women, more kids are on the street. If less problem here, you will see a lot of solution here. So what we are calling is, let's have a coordinated means of basketry where we are placing our funds to see the output so that we turn the story into successful stories.
Can I be a bit naughty and ask Dr. Chaula to weigh in on this issue? May I approach the bench? What are your thoughts on what you've just said on this issue of empowerment and the language and the semantics on this topic?
It's very interesting.
Absolutely.
Especially, I'm echoing with Nandela, we have already been empowered by God. But most of the time, men are not recognized their position. And for sure, we need to do something with this report. We need I agree, issue of supporting rather than empowering. What support we need is to have some kind of analysis. And I was asking my people, we have seen a number of facts, because fact is a fact. But in reality, it doesn't tie up. And I used to work with analysis most of the time. We have been seeing a number of activity, especially when you say I'm supporting resources of finance, giving this number of women. I used to ask, how many in terms of numbers women are there suffering from poverty? How many to start with? Then you can select a group of people as a cohort, support them with the quality information in terms upon give us the fact that we need to have business skills to the woman to empower or to improve their business. I found most of the women are poor, caring the child, no good houses, no enough capital. But we keep on saying we're empowering women. What are those women who were empowered? Show them. I was asking Nandela yesterday, we have 900,000 women who are empowered with such amount of funds. Where are they? I found a lot in the street, cooking, cleaning, with poor income activities with money. Actually, we need to do something. I'm very frustrated, really, because I need to empower women, but how? A lot of story. I need to change this theory into practice. I used to work with the output, especially we have these street children We have houses for these children. What are the exit plan? Because the number is increasing, and it really is a problem, especially with this small business, Wamachinga. It's very famous, Wamachinga. How are we going to improve from Wamachinga to be medium entrepreneurs instead of having Machinga forever and ever? So help us. That's why I'm here to listen the output of this discussion to give the permanent solution. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you. No pressure. Solutions, people. That's where we turn to next. And I'm going to start with you, Irene. People always talk about money, money, money. If I just get money, I'll be okay. Financial inclusion. And the numbers are impressive for Tanzania, driven by mobile. What difference is it really making? And if it isn't making a difference, how can it be made to make a bigger, better difference? There's access to finance for women.
It's not necessarily a very simple question.
No.
Because it all starts there. I mean, the role of finance is a catalyst, it's an enabler, and all of that. So, I mean, let me just take a little bit of a picture, which is repeating some of the statistics that Ya has said, and then land into that question. So, yes, we've seen great improvement in financial inclusion in Tanzania. We're talking about in the span of 10 years, this country was talking about close to 55% of people. Now here it's men and women and everybody else completely outside the financial system without any sort of mechanism that they're actually depending upon. And then this is a reversal 10 years later with the data from 2017. FinScope, you're talking about 65% being in the system and largely driven by mobile financial services, digital financial services. Now just landing in straight to the position of a woman. Yes, the women have moved along, you know, you just talk about the big numbers and we'll go into the pockets of really what are they doing within the financial system, because that really matters as well. Women have moved along, but along the line, there is actually a gap that is quite persistent, that is actually non-wavering. So we have like anything between 10 and 12%, you know, you see a very strong gap that is existing. But more so, this financial inclusion is actually including, you know, all types of financial services, you know, payments, moving money, having access to a bank account, having, you know, a microfinance and a credit. But if you really look deep into the kind of a more formal sort of financial services that will really support you know, income generation and livelihood improvement and resilience into a household, that is really where you start to see bigger gaps existing, and you see more women being more on the microfinance, you know, environment, or, you know, not necessarily actively participating in the banking system, or even within the banking system. I echo what my sister Caro just said. We need disaggregated data so that we can actually go deep and actually be able to understand some of these information qualitatively, but definitely the information that we have, you see more women not being quite active. And yes, you know, all this improvement that we've seen, what has actually happened that has actually supported it? Yes, we've seen very strong awareness, and even the information that we had today from Permanent Secretary, you see the government being completely intentional and aware to ensure that we are, you know, prioritizing and being intentional for women financial inclusion. You will see from National Financial Inclusion Framework, very strong targets being put in, an understanding of some of those challenges that are existing that are putting a woman outside the system, and a call to action really to the whole stakeholder in the way in which it can happen. But from an infrastructure point of view, which is really where we've gotten majority of our gains, you see the digital financial services really, and the proliferation of the agents network, which have actually allowed a woman who was completely outside the vicinity to actually have a reach to a financial access point, or even the agency banking. This has been some of the means and ways in which have actually assisted and actually to reach the women who are most of the time outside the peripheral. Coming in now to the question, Yes, and then also response from a demand side. We see the banks coming in, they are offering products, they're saying, we have a woman account, you know, and I'll go to that. We have a woman account, you know, we serve women, you know, and, you know, a lot of pink blushing, you know, make it pink, and it's just, yeah, we are serving the women. And honestly, you know, it's only the beginning, and we're seeing more of that, and that's important, because the journey has to start somewhere. You know, we're seeing more of that, even right now, even recently, we've seen even a bond being reasoned just with the sole intention to actually ensuring that we're serving women businesses. That is good. It's a very good progress. But really the call to action that I'm bringing is all this understanding that we have here of a position of a woman and a very intricate and complex situation in terms from a social norms point of view, from, you know, the access to productive assets that we're talking about, access to information, you know, access, I mean, in terms of the report is telling you still in terms of education, we still have women not necessarily quite educated. So in order to serve a woman, it doesn't necessarily take just an account. It doesn't just take you just standing and actually offering a particular product, albeit well-researched, but I think it needs a holistic customer value proposition. Which calls for a lot of partnership. It's not necessarily just the finance you know, institution can actually do by themselves, but it calls upon a very good sort of partnership with other actors and a thorough understanding of where women are so that we can actually be able to solve some of their problems. Allow me to just give an example here of some of the experiment and understanding what we did on women food vendors. The intention was, okay, let's just go and see how we can actually give access to formal accounts and actually digitize some of the transaction to actually be able to support women food vendors. And maybe that was going to be an account that is offered and it's given. But deep down, we realize the problem that the women food vendors have is not necessarily an account or a digital solution, but they are not making money. Yeah. You know, just go and actually study them and you realize it's actually a vicious cycle. It's a very negative vicious cycle. From what they begin with in the morning and they go to mom and pop's shop, monkey shop, and they will get whatever they get. In the end, by the time they pay their debts and they go home, it's a negative position. Yeah. So it doesn't matter, and I'm going to the financial sector, it doesn't matter what account you give to them, or it doesn't matter what digital solution you bring to them. The issue is, are we solving their problem? And that is actually what is actually bringing to the whole holistic customer value proposition. In order for the financial institutions to be serious about this, you need programs. You don't need a product. Yeah. You need programs that will bring about some of the partners and see how we can actually be able to address some of the cost elements that Mama Lishe have, you know, maybe bring about a different sort of value system that they need to have, maybe a new FMCG that will provide services for free, embed some of the literacy and, you know, capacity building. And on top of that, finance then will actually yield results, you know. So,
wow, so many things in there. The structural impediments to women's advancement. I've got to stop using this empowerment thing.
You're getting there. You're getting there.
Bill, there's a question for you somewhere in there. There is this tension, Sam, I'm coming to actually, between the need for government to raise money, you know, and I like the way the World Bank puts it, responsible borrowing, and making it easier for women or businesses or the private sector to thrive, to grow. In other words, to make it a business-friendly environment. It sounds to me, what she's describing, is that it's not business-friendly at all, this environment. And it's worse if you're a woman, for the reasons that you mentioned. What ought to be done, you know, to make it a bit more business-friendly environment, maybe especially for women? You spoke a little bit about here, titling, getting a title deed and requiring the spousal consent. Are there other impediments that need to be broken down? And what can be done to actually make it easier for women to access the assets and to actually make money and to get an income?
Okay. I wanted to interject on the empowerment thing earlier. In fact, maybe I'll connect.
Off to the dome. Off to the dome.
I'll connect it to my answer. It's probably going to be a little bit long-winded. For me, the semantics address two things: the salience and the agency. I think what Caro was alluding to was that if you use some terms, you take the agency away from the person, and if you're empowering them, all they have to do is kind of wait and receive. There is a very instructive experience I had. The village that my grandfather comes from, I visited them once and saw the school, and it was in pretty bad shape. And I'm very passionate about reading, so I thought, look, we need to bring a library to this village in Jombe, in school, and maybe get them some pads, some iPads, so that the kids would be able to go to school. So I called the headmaster, Mr. Sandagila, a very nice man. I said, look, I think we can work together. I want to build a library in this school because I'm really passionate. It's where my grandfather comes from. And I'll try and get some iPads so that kids can use them. And the headmaster said, yeah, that's a fantastic idea. It's great. But we probably need a toilet first. And we're not connected to the power, so if you give us iPads, they're probably not going to be used. So in my head, coming from Dar es Salaam, I'm seeing a very beautiful library in that school with iPads. I want to empower them, right? But my attempts to empower them would be imposing on them something that they don't need or don't want at that time. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because this is what I think Carol was saying, is if your view is to empower someone, you tend to give them solutions. You know, you need training, I'll train you. If you need loans, I'll need you. And you can get some very good metrics done, right? Yeah. We've given away 900 billion, 600 women groups have received them, but is it the need that they were looking to solve? And I think even when it comes to improving the business environment, it is very important to ask businesses what challenges they're facing. You can have a great blueprint. You know, you can borrow some great models from other countries, but what are the specific needs of Tanzanian women? And you need to ask them, those Tanzanian women. So I think that's agency.
Yes.
And then the second one is salience. And I'll just speak a little bit. I did some research when I was called to sit on this panel. Just the organization I work in, Deloitte, and I just asked, okay, how are we doing? Because it's one thing to have the metrics right, but it's another thing to have the metrics salient, so that people recognize, oh, actually, women are making a fantastic contribution. So if you look at Deloitte Tanzania, we have 57% of our employees women, right? Okay. And that speaks to the fact that our hiring process is very meritocratic, you know? So you have to go through the same tests, you have to do the same aptitude tests, you have to do the same interviews. So when you remove some of those barriers, you see a lot of girls come in when they graduate from university. And you can see that, by the way, with even their secondary education results. The more you improve it, the more girls do better. And then, obviously, you go a grade higher, and you say, how many managers do we have? Not just employees, because you don't want to just have the numbers. And you realize, actually, there are 59% women managers who basically are the engine of the organization. So right then, why do you have a women empowerment program in Deloitte? Maybe you should just be showcasing the fact that these young girls who are coming in have more role models who are female than male in an organization, for example, right? And you can go as far as the Africa Exco level, where it's 42% female at the Exco level, where the CEO is female, where the board chair is female, where the East Africa chair is female, you know, where the Manco is 50-50. So how many people knew that, for example? So
I didn't.
You didn't, yeah?
I didn't.
So I'm talking about salience, and there's a funny quote I heard I think it was Mona El-Tahawi who said, GDP is a very patriarchal number.
Absolutely.
Because it doesn't quantify a lot of what women do.
Yeah.
So again, what I'm saying is salience. Show the women and men in a very clear way the contribution that women are making.
But Sam, I'm going to challenge you there.
Yeah.
Is salience enough? Carol, is salience enough? We talk about role models, they look like me, so therefore I can also be like them one day. Is that enough to tackle this really big
No, absolutely.
challenge of norms? Is salience enough to shatter norms? Carol?
It's somewhere to start. It's definitely a place to start, but I believe that we definitely need to do more. I would rephrase that question would be, how do you navigate through norms by using policies and frameworks, right? And just to piggyback on what Irene was also, right? But just to piggyback on what Irene had mentioned, one of the things that I always have an issue with is when we're looking at women advancement programs or women support programs, we're always thinking micro, you know, and we don't think macro. And it speaks to, you know, the challenges that she was speaking to. And I don't know if you were done, Sam, but I was also going to give another example.
I'm bullying Sam, it's okay.
I was also going to give another example of how we don't really design these solutions from what we call a user-centric, perspective. Because so we're trying to push for women's digital inclusion, and one of the challenges that we saw during COVID-19, I know in Tanzania we've said that we didn't have that, but we saw quite some effects. And we did a survey on COVID-19 Tanzania realities and how they've affected entrepreneurs. And one of the things that we realized or observed was a lot of women entrepreneurs, by the way, I don't say female, that's another thing, but I know I'm going to be pushing it if I speak about it now. But women entrepreneurs were really shut off from most of the assistance or support programs or initiatives that were coming after COVID-19, because one, they were not formal businesses, they were not registered, and then the other challenge was they were not digital. So we try to come up with solutions and be like, okay, so how can we support you to formalize your business? Only to realize that most of these women entrepreneurs did not want to formalize their business because of the policies that come with that particular business environment once you're formalized. So again, it speaks to the vicious cycle of hand to mouth for the women entrepreneurs. They don't have enough savings for them to actually go a step further and say, I'm going to open a bank account. But they're not formal because they cannot afford to pay whatever that comes after them formalizing their business. So a lot of them were shut off from, the grants that were coming in. They couldn't apply for these grants. They couldn't, get into these women digital inclusion programs because they were saying, this is not for me. Find me a solution that would work for me. And these are women entrepreneurs that you'd find, you mentioned, Dr. Zainab, the Machingas, right? They use tables at the markets. We went to Kariako and Karume, and we were telling them, listen, we're going to register the business for you. Like, we're just going to get you the business registration. We're going to make sure that we get you online, do a social media page. And they're like, okay, it sounds really fancy, but who is going to man my business when I am attending your training? And that's the other thing, like, okay, so how do we think about the subsistence of these women when we're pushing for capacity building programs? Is there a complementing factor that would actually allow for them to really be present, and, take or grasp the opportunities that we're presenting to them, right? And then when you go back to norms, which is, I think it will speak to the salience, is you're telling this woman, get online, I'm going to register your business. The minute they start making more money than the husband, it's an issue at home. And they're subjected to domestic, intimate partner violence. And at the end of the day, they come and tell you that, you know what, I don't think this is for me. At the end of the day, I have to put my family first. So how do you have policies and frameworks that would, one, push for a mindset change when it comes to gender mainstreaming? It would push for financial inclusion. It would push for more girls to stay in school, because even when we're looking at the figures, you look at the school enrollment rates from primary school all the way to secondary, we don't have the same women or girl child who is graduating at higher secondary level or higher learning institution. So at the end of the day, yes, we need the role models. Yes, we need all these other interventions. They're quite beautiful. I call them cosmetic interventions. But what exactly are we doing about our cultural, socio-cultural norms that are continuing to act as limitations and barriers towards the girl child's development, I would say, advancement. So, yeah, I think I would.
Doctor, that question to you. You're in government. Are you making policy after studying it? How do you address these norms and salience? I like your salience book. Is it enough? How does government address these structural impediments, really, to women accessing assets and accessing economic growth?
Well, just to answer, I would say it should not be the business of the government alone. Yeah. Because a lot of you are holding a lot of money because you are using it to say you're supporting the government. So all that money put together, the government money and the money out there, should be put in the right place. One thing I'm seeing a big gap here in all this discussion we're talking about is where is the boy child? Thank you. And we're expecting that all our efforts and interventions are for girls, and we are expecting that the boys will receive the girls happily ever after marriage and not challenge them and not accept the situation as it is. I grew up in a pastor's family, so I can express myself this much just because I got that chance too, in a family with more girls than boys. But going on through, I learned through the process. I was encouraged, and until today, I'm still being encouraged by my boss and other people. And through that process, you are able. But if we talk about this story as a one-angle story, it's about women alone. It's about girls alone. By the time I come to marry you, you don't know me at all. This is a new Nandel. I don't know this kind of a woman. I'm just that a woman who's supposed to bow down on me, who should be accepting everything I say. What kind of a woman are you bringing? That's why we are seeing an increase in GBV. And one of the gap I know that will be formally checked, we need to look at the TASAF, for example. Dashing out of the TASAF money and what it's doing to women. We are not preparing men to understand that Nandera is the commissioner. Anytime at the night, the minister or the permanent secretary will be calling, and she will have to answer and can go out anytime. He will not understand that. So we need to, as we speak of supporting women, enabling girls, we need to do the same to the boys. We need to prepare them to learn to change the culture. As we do together, I'm sure in the future things will change. But as an anthropologist talking about change of culture, perception, it needs a long-term strategy. We don't need like a one-year intervention, 2-year intervention. Some of the problems that we really face as a government are projects that are short-term. And also the projects are also single. They are not multi-angled in terms of looking at the problem. Look at the presentation that we just heard from the World Bank and some of the success stories that she's been telling us. And you could hear her talk about issues of projects on land so that women can access land. You hear about projects where they can access skill. You hear about projects where they can access input and so forth. But these projects without being together, you have one project that has this multi-strategy. Deal with the culture here. Deal with the education here. So that you can solve something at least. But when we have these projects that are angling only one, okay, you give me the land. But when you give me the land, at the end, when my husband died, my kids come to me. You know, the boys, they'll be, this is our land. Hey, give us the land. So you have that kind of one path, which is not really going to have that multi, kind of, you have the results that are really impactful in terms of seeing a woman being able to contribute and enjoy her labor or fruits like a man. So I see that's where I think we lack that. So we heard about digital skills. We heard about, Chuma Ulete. There's one article you should read by Jackie Ngumia on the Chuma Ulete and issues of business. That is quite interesting, and it talks about even for young boys and girls, youth who are doing business, being supported, and they can go, continue, they can make it because of issues of social culture. So that really tells you how you need to deal into these situations. But we know for sure that the stories of women are in rotating and saving groups. It's very, very few women who will not find them, and they will be in the different networks. Yeah. And this is a very angled, good place where it's a start, where you can really work out. Why start registering new groups every day? You know, while you have already women arranged. Sometimes it brings a kind of what you call a turbulence. You know, people are already focused doing their thing, and then you start again with another event. So I think somehow we need to look at this in a bigger picture and find out a better way we can protect both a boy and a girl for the future. Otherwise, I don't see any good future without that.
Could I make some intervention? I think
Yes, I was gonna
you
come
sort
to
of,
you,
I was
actually.
going to say, you forgot about me.
No, I
Yeah, I think, you know, I think everything has been said is very true and so forth. But one of the important things that we're forgetting about the study that has come out, and it's a reality in Tanzania, is the issues of discriminatory laws. Laws that, or regulations that are not being enforced to protect women and girls. And the reason we want to focus on women and girls is because, my dear sister from the ministry, is because they're not in the same playing field. They're not because of social norms, practices, and opportunities at the same level as men and boys. It's not to say we have to disregard men and boys. We have to engage them. We have this interesting efforts of how do we engage men and traditional leaders and male institutions to be part and parcel of the equation for gender equality. It's a long, long struggle and so forth. But I think in Tanzania, you know, in the constitutions, there are very important, statements that are calling for equality, and then at the same time is then pulling it away from women. So we need really, and that's one of the, I think, one of the important things that the study is saying is that how do we look at, review these laws that are discriminatory for women in terms of preventing them from opportunities, looking at regulations in business. It's not easy to say that it's, you know, I have 50% of my women are in leadership, which is fantastic. I'm sure you're implementing the women economic principles and you signed up for it and so forth. But then how are you then translating that here in Tanzania in terms of opportunities? If women, poor women, marginalized women, disadvantaged women, women in communities are having, you know, a hard time even accessing basic issues as water, as access to, you know, productive resources, land ownership, title deeds. If we have, you know, inheritance laws that are so archaic, not to say Tanzania is archaic, but if you have these laws that are preventing women from inheriting because of religion or culture and so forth, we cannot progress. If Tanzania wants to be, and that's, I think, the basic message from the reports, that Tanzania has made incredible progress, but in order for Tanzania to reach its potential, to meet its incredible obligations and commitments that they have in the 5-year development plan, the Vision 2050, is it? Even in, you know, Zanzibar, all of that, we need to look at what are the institutions, what do we want to change, what do we want to transform in terms of the institutions, the legal structures, the regulations that are preventing women from reaching their potential. And I think the issues of, you know, that, you know, access and assets, it's you know, as economists and business owners, those are essential. But how do you then, you know, what is it that's preventing them from reaching? And what is the obligation for government? Government has an important obligation. When you're getting, reviewing your budget, are you applying a gender-sensitive budgeting plans, resources? How are we making sure where women are present in the key sectors, in agriculture, in tourism, or in, you know, small enterprises? How are we making sure that the resources, the budget plans are sensitive to that? You have, you know, it's a matter of looking at it holistically. How do we ensure private sector that you also, you know, meet your commitments to women have, you know, access and so forth? So I think it's the laws, the practices, the social norms, the institutions that are very much, you know, against equality. Yeah, it's just the reality that we're in. In Tanzania, as I said earlier, it's not an island in itself, but if it wants to progress in terms of reaching the middle income countries, if it wants to compete at the regional level, we need to look at all these barriers for trade, for women's access to cross-border trade. What are the lack of challenges that they're having in the regulations and protection of their rights to move? We've been supporting a program for, I think it was you who had mentioned, was it the women in the marketplaces?
Yes.
Yeah, they have legal structures that aren't put in place. Many of them are very much, against women's participation and voice. So, there's issues of sextortion when you're accessing basic rights on health and education and so forth. Especially if you go to communities that are very disadvantaged, that are marginalized and so forth. Issues of language. We were trying to meet with women in Arusha, in a village, and they mentioned the issues of even accessing the TASAF. TASAF has set all these rules and regulations. They did not really taking women into account. What are their needs? What types of jobs do they want? What are the challenges they're facing in terms of even accessing the fund in their villages? Are they coming to them? Do they have to travel thousands of miles because they are in the interior? The road structures are far away from where they can access. So it's a matter of, like I was saying, I think the issues of the report is very, very important. A lot of policy issues are there. The data is there. We need to go deep. And in terms of then what do we need to do to support Tanzania as development partners is really unpacking that and coming out with solutions that have the women at the center. Yeah, and their voices and their participation, at least to ask them on that. So it's a matter of, I think, a lot of structural, legal, and institutional changes that need to take into account. There is progress, mind you, but then the private sector, I think, has not created an conducive environment. I very much like the NMB initiative on the Jariza gender bonds. It's probably one of the first that you're seeing in the region. Kenya and others are trying to pick that up. But then there's also experience from Latin America, from Asia and so forth, where government is also taking that initiative. How do we then include that? How do we ensure that we're looking at it from a feminist perspective that is promoting equality of opportunities and that is protecting rights of especially the marginalized women, the ones that do need that, leg up. Yeah. So I think, but there's a lot. I think it's a fantastic report, a lot of information, lots of things that we could all use. And just to plug, we're going to be launching, if you don't mind, Mara, we're going to be launching a report on social institutions and gender inequality index for Tanzania that looks at the social norms, attitudes, and perspectives that have an impact on bodily autonomy, access to opportunities, economic opportunities, leadership, violence, where so many issues are there where a woman has to, reality, the majority of our women, for Tanzania and East Africa, for them to even get out of the family home, to go and do a small business or go into the farm and access, they have to have the permission of their male relations and so forth. So we need to change that. It's a long process, but the laws have to be, definitely, you have to have a law. You have to change the inheritance law, which is so critical.
Dr. Chaula, the laws. Low-hanging fruit. Not necessarily easy to pick, but low-hanging fruit. It's 11:30, and the program says here it's time for audience discussion Q&A. You monopolized the discussion so far. They've been listening very patiently to you. So now they need to push back or propose. You wanted to say something. And then any hands? I've seen one hand over there. Any other?
Sam wanted to finish his answer.
Sam wanted to finish his answer. Sam and I will negotiate this a little bit later. Ask Sam a question, and then he can finish his answer. But please, doctor.
Very shortly, I just wanted to say, Hodan, I agree with what you're saying, but I think my take comes from just growing up in Tanzania and understanding my brothers, my sister, my fathers, and my grandfathers. Yeah. Law alone will not work.
Absolutely.
We have to change the attitude, perception. And I still maintain, I think as a country, and I believe so, if we bank on a long-term investment to empower girls, women, boys, we will get somewhere. But if we don't do that, we will deal with law, regulations. These policemen are men. They've grown through that culture. We see that most hierarchy, most men are on top. So what do? We need boys to understand, to be partners to their sisters. And in the future, things will change. It takes long.